Celeste Harper adjusted the worn leather bookmark between the pages of her favorite novel as the afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Pages and sometimes Dreams bookstore. At 22, she possessed a beauty that seemed untouched by the harsh realities of the world, soft auburn curls that caught the light, gentle green eyes that sparkled with intelligence, and a shy smile that could warm even the coldest hearts. The small bookstore in Millbrook had been her sanctuary for 3 years, a place where she could lose herself among stories of adventure and romance while earning just enough to help her grandmother, Rose. With the monthly expenses, the old wooden floors creaked pleasantly under her feet as she moved between the towering shelves, carefully dusting each book with the tenderness one might show a beloved pet. Literature had always been her escape from a world that often felt too big and overwhelming. While other girls her age were out experiencing life, Celeste found her adventures between the pages of classic novels and contemporary stories that transported her to places she had only dreamed of visiting. Thunder rumbled ominously outside, and Celeste glanced toward the large front windows where dark clouds were gathering with alarming speed. The weather forecast had mentioned possible storms, but she had not expected them to arrive so suddenly. She pulled her soft pink cardigan closer around her shoulders and returned to organizing the new arrivals that had come in that morning. The unexpected visitor, the brass bell above the door, chimed urgently as someone rushed inside just as the first drops of rain began to fall.
Oh.
Celeste looked up from her work to see a tall figure shaking water from his dark hair, his expensive-looking coat slightly damp from the sudden downpour. The stranger was unlike any customer who had ever entered their quiet little bookstore. Everything about him spoke of wealth and sophistication. From his perfectly tailored charcoal suit to the way he carried himself with natural confidence, Sebastian Knight paused just inside the doorway, his steel-gray eyes adjusting to the warm, amber lighting of the bookstore. He had been walking back from a disappointing meeting with potential investors when the storm had caught him off guard. The last thing he had expected to find on this quiet street was a bookstore that looked like something from a fairy tale, complete with the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, standing among the stacks like a guardian of literary treasures. Celeste felt her cheeks grow warm as their eyes met. Never before had someone looked at her with such intensity, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. She smoothed down her simple floral dress and approached the stranger with the polite smile she reserved for all customers, though her heart was beating much faster than usual. "Good afternoon," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle accent of someone who had grown up in small-town comfort. "Please feel free to look around. The storm should pass soon, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Sebastian found himself momentarily speechless. Her voice was like music, soft, genuine, and completely free of the artificial sweetness he had grown accustomed to hearing from the women in his social circle. There was something pure about her, something that reminded him of stories his grandmother used to tell him about princesses hidden away in towers, waiting for their true adventures to begin. "The coffee catastrophe, thank you," Sebastian replied, his voice deeper and more controlled than Celeste had expected. "I was actually hoping to find something to read. Do you have any recommendations for someone who enjoys classic literature but has been too busy to read for pleasure in recent years?" Celeste's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Books were her passion, and nothing made her happier than helping someone discover the perfect story. She led him toward the classics section, her movements graceful, despite her obvious nervousness around this sophisticated stranger. "These are some of my favorites," she said, running her fingers along the spines of well-loved books. "If you enjoy timeless romance with depth, I would recommend Pride and Prejudice. For something with more adventure, perhaps The Count of Monte Cristo. And if you want something that will make you think about life and choices, The Great Gatsby is absolutely beautiful." As she reached for The Great Gatsby on a higher shelf, Sebastian stepped closer to help her, their hands brushing briefly as they both grasped the book. The contact was electric, sending a warm shiver through Celeste that she had never experienced before. She had read about such moments in countless romance novels, but had never believed they could happen in real life. "Me get that for you," Sebastian said gently, easily reaching the book and handing it to her. "You seem to know these stories very well." "I love books more than almost anything," Celeste admitted, hugging The Great Gatsby against her chest. "They have been my best friends since childhood. My grandmother always says I live more in stories than in real life." There was something endearing about her honesty that touched Sebastian's heart. In his world of corporate meetings and social obligations, genuine conversation had become a rare treasure. This young woman spoke from her heart without calculation or agenda, and her authenticity was refreshing beyond measure. "Would you like some coffee while you browse?" Celeste offered, gesturing toward a small corner where she had set up a cozy reading area with a vintage coffee maker. "I was just about to make myself a cup." As she prepared the coffee, Sebastian found himself watching her every movement. She moved with unconscious grace, her concentration complete as she measured the grounds and waited for the water to heat. Everything about her spoke of someone who took joy in simple pleasures and found beauty in everyday moments. When Celeste turned to hand him the steaming mug, disaster struck. Her foot caught in the edge of the worn carpet, and she stumbled forward. The hot coffee flew from the cup, splashing directly onto Sebastian's pristine white shirt and expensive tie. Horror washed over Celeste's face as she realized what had happened. The coffee was spreading across his shirt, and she could see that his clothes probably cost more than she earned in several months. Tears of mortification began to well up in her eyes as she grabbed napkins from the counter. Oh no, I am so sorry," she stammered, dabbing frantically at his shirt. "I cannot believe I just did that. Your beautiful clothes are ruined, and it is all my fault. Please let me pay for the cleaning, or replacement, or whatever you need." The moment that changed everything, instead of the anger or irritation that Celeste expected, Sebastian began to laugh. It was a rich, warm sound that filled the bookstore and made her look up at him in surprise. His gray eyes were sparkling with genuine amusement rather than annoyance. "Please do not worry about it," he said gently, taking the napkins from her trembling hands. "It is just a shirt, and accidents happen to everyone. You have nothing to apologize for." But Celeste was nearly in tears from embarrassment. She had never felt so clumsy or foolish in her entire life. This elegant stranger had walked into her peaceful world, and she had managed to humiliate herself within minutes of meeting him. "I feel terrible," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm not usually so clumsy. I just got nervous because you seem so important and sophisticated. And I am just a simple bookstore girl who has never been anywhere or done anything interesting." Sebastian's expression softened as he recognized the depth of her distress. He gently placed his finger under her chin, lifting her face so she would look at him. The gesture was tender and respectful, nothing like the aggressive advances she had witnessed other men make toward women. "Listen to me," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her heart skip. "You are not just anything. You are kind, intelligent, and you have just shown me more genuine hospitality in 10 minutes than I usually receive in entire evenings at fancy restaurants." Celeste felt her breath catch as she looked into his eyes. No one had ever spoken to her with such sincerity, or made her feel as though her simple life had value. She had always believed that she was ordinary, unremarkable, someone who would live quietly in the background while more confident people claimed the spotlight. "But you do not even know me," she protested weakly. "I am nobody special. I have never traveled anywhere exotic or done anything that would impress someone like you." "Someone like me," Sebastian repeated thoughtfully. "And what exactly do you think I am like?" The innocent confession. Celeste twisted her hands nervously, searching for the right words. "You are clearly successful and worldly. Your clothes, the way you carry yourself, even the way you speak, everything about you suggests that you belong to a different world than mine. You probably have an exciting life full of interesting people and amazing experiences." Sebastian studied her face carefully, noting the genuine innocence in her expression. There was no pretense or manipulation in her words, just honest observation mixed with a touching lack of self-confidence. "And you believe that makes me better than you in some way?" he said gently. "Not better," Celeste corrected quickly, "just different. I have lived in this small town my entire life. I work in a bookstore, I take care of my grandmother, and I read books in my spare time. I've never been to fancy parties or traveled to exotic places. I've never even..." She paused, her cheeks turning pink with embarrassment. "Never what?" Sebastian encouraged, his voice patient and kind. Celeste looked down at her hands, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I have never been touched by a man, sir. Not in a romantic way, I mean. I have never been kissed or held or any of the things that other girls my age take for granted. My grandmother raised me with old-fashioned values, and I have always believed that those things should be special, should mean something. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest. Celeste immediately regretted her words. Certain that she had revealed too much to this sophisticated stranger, who probably viewed her as a naive child. But Sebastian's reaction was nothing like what she expected. Instead of amusement or pity, his expression filled with something that looked almost like reverence. He took a small step closer. Being careful not to invade her personal space or make her uncomfortable, the prince's response, "There is nothing wrong with waiting for something special," Sebastian said quietly, his voice filled with respect rather than condescension. "In fact, I think it shows incredible strength and self-respect. You should never feel ashamed of your values or your choices." Celeste looked up at him in surprise. Throughout her life, other people had often made her feel naive or old-fashioned for her traditional beliefs about romance and relationships. Friends from school had teased her about being too cautious, too shy, too unwilling to just have fun like everyone else. "You really think so?" she asked tentatively. "I know so," Sebastian replied with absolute certainty. "What you just told me makes you more precious, not less. Any man would be honored to earn your trust and affection." The way he said the words made Celeste feel as though she was indeed precious, as though her innocence was a gift rather than a source of embarrassment. For the first time in her life, someone had made her feel valued for exactly who she was, rather than who she might become with enough changes. "You are very kind to say that," she said softly. "Most people think I am just scared or inexperienced. Perhaps you are both of those things," Sebastian admitted with a gentle smile. "But that does not make you less worthy of respect and tenderness. If anything, it means you deserve to be treated with extra care by anyone who is fortunate enough to earn your attention." As the storm continued to rage outside, Sebastian found himself reluctant to leave the warm sanctuary of the bookstore and return to his complicated world of business deals and social obligations. This young woman had touched something in the heart that had been dormant for years, a desire to protect and cherish. Someone truly good and innocent. The storm within thunder crashed overhead, causing Celeste to jump slightly. Sebastian instinctively moved closer, his protective instincts activated by her small show of vulnerability. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked gently. "A little," she admitted. "I know it is silly, but loud noises have always made me nervous. My grandmother used to tell me stories during thunderstorms to distract me when I was little." "What kind of stories?" Sebastian asked, genuinely interested. Celeste's face brightened despite her nervousness. "Fairy tales, mostly. Stories about brave princesses and noble knights, about true love conquering impossible obstacles. She always told me that somewhere in the world, there was someone special waiting for me, someone who would treat me like the heroines in those stories." Sebastian felt his heart tighten with unexpected emotion. This beautiful, innocent young woman still believed in fairy tales and true love. Despite living in a world that often crushed such romantic ideals, her faith in love and goodness was both inspiring and heartbreaking. "And do you still believe in those stories?" he asked softly. Celeste was quiet for a long moment, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. "I want to," she finally admitted. "Sometimes I feel foolish for hoping that real life could be as beautiful as the stories I read. But yes, I still believe that love can be magical and that some people are meant to find each other." As lightning illuminated the bookstore windows, Sebastian made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He was going to prove to this remarkable young woman that fairy tales could indeed come true, and that she deserved to be treated like the princess she truly was. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but Sebastian realized that a different kind of storm was just beginning in his heart. For the first time in his successful but lonely life, he had found someone worth fighting for, someone worth becoming a better man for, and he intended to show Celeste Harper that princes still existed. In the modern world, 3 weeks had passed since that stormy afternoon, and Sebastian Knight had become a fixture at Pages and Dreams bookstore. Every day at precisely 4 o'clock, his sleek black car would pull up outside the small shop, and he would enter with the same quiet confidence that had first captivated Celeste. What started as casual visits to browse books had evolved into long conversations about literature, life, and dreams that neither had dared to share with anyone else. Celeste found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. She would spend extra time choosing her outfits each morning, favoring the soft pastels and flowing fabrics that seemed to catch his attention. Her grandmother Rose had noticed the change in her granddaughter immediately, the way Celeste hummed while doing chores, the extra care she took with her appearance, and the dreamy expression that would cross her face when she thought no one was watching. "This young man has certainly made an impression on you," Rose observed one evening, as they shared dinner in their modest cottage behind the bookstore. The elderly woman had kind eyes that missed nothing and a wisdom gained from decades of watching love stories unfold in her small town. "He's just a customer, grandmother," Celeste replied, though her blush betrayed her true feelings. "He enjoys books, and we have interesting conversations about literature." Rose smiled knowingly. "My dear child, I have seen many customers come and go over the years, but none of them made you glow the way you do when you speak of Sebastian. There is nothing wrong with caring for someone who clearly cares for you in return." The growing connection. Sebastian had never experienced anything like the peace he found in Celeste's presence. After years of navigating the cutthroat world of business, dealing with people who wanted something from him, her genuine nature was like discovering an oasis in a desert. She never asked about his wealth or status, never tried to impress him with false sophistication. Instead, she shared her thoughts about the books they both loved, told him stories about the regular customers who frequented the shop, and listened with rapt attention when he spoke about his dreams of using his success to make a positive difference in the world. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Sebastian arrived to find Celeste arranging a display of vintage poetry books near the front window. She wore a lavender dress that brought out the green in her eyes. Her hair was pulled back with a simple ribbon that somehow looked more elegant than any expensive accessory he had ever seen. "These are beautiful," he said, examining the leather-bound volumes. "Do you have a favorite poet?" Celeste's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Her love sonnets are absolutely breathtaking. The way she writes about love as something transformative and pure, it makes me believe that such feelings really exist." Sebastian picked up a volume and opened it to a random page. His voice was warm and rich as he read aloud, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that neither dared acknowledge directly. Celeste felt her cheeks warm as she imagined what it would feel like to love someone so completely, to have someone feel that way about her. She was lucky to find such love, Celeste said softly, not meeting his eyes. "Perhaps luck had nothing to do with it," Sebastian replied, his voice gentle but intense. "Perhaps some people are simply meant to find each other, regardless of the obstacles that might stand in their way." The mother's intervention there. Peaceful routine was shattered the following Thursday when Margaret Knight walked into Pages and dreams like a storm cloud in designer clothing. Sebastian's mother was everything Celeste was not: tall, impeccably groomed, and radiating the kind of cold authority that came from decades of moving in elite social circles. Her sharp blue eyes took in every detail of the modest bookstore, with obvious disapproval. "So this is where my son has been spending his afternoons," Margaret said, her voice carrying the crisp accent of boarding schools and country clubs. "How charming." Celeste had been shelving returns in the biography section when the elegant woman entered. Something about the stranger's demeanor immediately put her on edge, though she maintained the polite smile she offered all customers. "Good afternoon," Celeste said pleasantly. "Are you looking for anything in particular today?" Margaret's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I think I have found exactly what I was looking for. You must be the little bookworm who's been entertaining my son." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. This was Sebastian's mother, and her tone made it clear that she viewed Celeste as nothing more than a temporary amusement, a curiosity to be examined and dismissed. "Sebastian is a valued customer," Celeste replied carefully, trying to maintain her composure, despite the woman's obvious hostility. "Customer," Margaret repeated mockingly. Is that what we are calling it? My dear girl, let me be perfectly clear about something. My son may enjoy playing in your little fantasy world, but men like Sebastian do not build real relationships with shopgirls. You are a pleasant diversion, nothing more. Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and Margaret delivered them with the precision of someone accustomed to getting her way through intimidation. Celeste felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to give this cruel woman the satisfaction of seeing her break down. I think you should leave, Celeste said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, despite her efforts to remain calm. I will leave, Margaret agreed, moving toward the door. But remember what I have told you. When Sebastian tires of this little game, and he will, do not say you were not warned. The charity gala invitation that evening, Sebastian arrived at the bookstore to find Celeste unusually quiet and withdrawn. Her usual bright smile was replaced by a forced expression that did not reach her eyes, and she seemed unable to meet his gaze directly. Has something happened? He asked with immediate concern. You seem upset? Celeste considered telling him about his mother's visit, but decided against it. She did not want to cause problems between Sebastian and his family, especially when Margaret's words had merely voiced the doubts that Celeste had been carrying in her own heart. Just a long day, she said, with false cheerfulness. Nothing worth worrying about. Sebastian studied her face, clearly not convinced by her explanation, but he chose not to press the issue. Instead, he pulled an elegant envelope from his jacket pocket. I have something I wanted to ask you, he said, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that surprised her. My company is hosting a charity gala this weekend to raise funds for literacy programs in underserved communities. I know it is not your usual type of event, but I would be honored if you would attend as my guest. Celeste stared at the invitation, her heart racing. The embossed paper felt expensive beneath her fingers, and she could only imagine the kind of sophisticated affair Sebastian was inviting her to join. The thought of attending such an event both thrilled and terrified her. I do not know if I belong at something like that, she said hesitantly. I have never been to a formal event, and I would not know how to act or what to say to your friends. Sebastian reached across the counter and gently took her hands in his. The contact sent familiar warmth racing through her body, making her acutely aware of how much his touch affected her. You belong anywhere I want you to be, he said firmly, and I want you there with me. You do not need to pretend to be anyone other than yourself. That is exactly who I want by my side. The transformation, despite her reservations, Celeste agreed to attend the gala. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation that felt like something from one of her beloved fairy tales. Sebastian insisted on handling every detail, from arranging for a personal stylist to help her choose the perfect dress to sending a car to take her to an exclusive salon for hair and makeup. Saturday evening, Celeste stood before the mirror in her grandmother's bedroom, barely recognizing the elegant young woman looking back at her. The stylist had chosen a flowing gown in deep emerald green that complemented her coloring perfectly. The fabric skimmed her curves in all the right places, while maintaining the modesty that was so much a part of her nature. Ben swept up in an intricate style that showcased the graceful line of her neck, and subtle makeup enhanced her natural beauty without overwhelming her delicate features. You look like a princess, Rose said with tears in her eyes. Your grandfather would have been so proud to see you like this. When Sebastian arrived to collect her, his reaction was everything Celeste could have hoped for. He stood frozen in the doorway for several long moments, his gray eyes dark with an emotion she had never seen before. You were breathtaking, he said finally, his voice rough with feeling. Absolutely breathtaking. The magical evening, the charity gala, was being held at the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As their car pulled up to the entrance, Celeste felt her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. Through the massive windows, she could see hundreds of elegantly dressed people mingling beneath glittering chandeliers. She suddenly felt like an imposter, preparing to infiltrate a world where she did not belong. Sebastian seemed to sense her anxiety, took her hand gently, his thumb tracing soothing circles across her knuckles. Remember what I told you, he said softly. You belong here because you are with me. And I am the luckiest man in that room because you chose to spend this evening by my side. From the moment they entered the ballroom, Sebastian treated Celeste like royalty. He kept her close to his side, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. When people approached to speak with him, he introduced her with obvious pride, his voice warm with affection as he spoke her name. Celeste found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. The other guests were friendlier than she had expected, and many seemed genuinely interested in her work at the bookstore. Sebastian never left her side, ensuring she always had someone to talk to and making sure she felt included in every conversation. The garden. Kiss. The most magical moment came when Sebastian suggested they step outside for some air. The hotel's garden was illuminated by hundreds of tiny lights strung through the trees, creating an enchanted atmosphere that took Celeste's breath away. A small fountain bubbled peacefully in the center of the space, and the scent of jasmine filled the warm night air. "This is beautiful," Celeste said, turning slowly to take in the romantic setting. "Not as beautiful as you," Sebastian replied, moving to stand directly in front of her. The intensity in his voice made her look up at him questioningly. In the soft glow of the garden lights, his face was filled with an emotion that made her heart race with anticipation and nervousness. "Celeste," he said softly, reaching up to cup her face gently in his hands. "These past few weeks have been the happiest of my life. You have brought something into my world that I did not even realize was missing." "What?" she whispered, barely able to find her voice. "Joy," he replied simply. "Pure, uncomplicated joy. The kind that comes from being with someone who sees beauty in simple things, who believes in goodness and love and all the things that make life worth living." Celeste felt tears pricking her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her with such tenderness, had ever made her feel as though her simple nature was a gift rather than a limitation. "Sebastian," she began, but he silenced her gently by placing his thumb against her lips. "I know this is moving quickly," he said, "and I know we come from different worlds, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and rare and worth fighting for." When he lowered his head toward hers, Celeste felt time stand still. Their lips met in a kiss that was everything she had dreamed her first kiss would be: tender, reverent, and filled with promise. Sebastian kissed her as though she was precious beyond measure, as though he was honored to be the first man to touch her lips. When they finally parted, Celeste felt transformed. The shy bookstore girl was still there, but she was also a woman who had been awakened to love and desire, and all the beautiful possibilities that came with them. The whispers begin their perfect. Evening was marred only by the whispers that followed. Them, as they made their way back through the ballroom, Celeste caught fragments of conversations as they passed, comments about Sebastian's little charity case, and speculation about how long his slumming phase would last. The cruel words stung more than she wanted to admit, especially coming so soon after Margaret's warning. By the time Sebastian took her home that night, doubt had begun to creep into her heart like poison, threatening to destroy the magic of their perfect evening standing on her grandmother's front porch. Sebastian pulled her close for one final kiss goodnight. As his lips touched hers, Celeste tried to memorize every detail of the moment, afraid that it might be their last. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered against his lips. It was like living in a fairy tale. "This is only the beginning," Sebastian promised, his voice filled with conviction. "I intend to give you a lifetime of fairy tale moments." But as Celeste watched his car disappear into the night, she could not shake the feeling that they're different. Worlds were about to collide in ways that neither of them was prepared for. The whispers from the gala echoed in her mind, mixing with Margaret's harsh words to create a symphony of doubt that threatened to drown out the memory of Sebastian's tender promises. Standing alone in the moonlight, Celeste touched her lips where Sebastian had kissed her and wondered if love really could conquer the obstacles that seemed determined to keep them apart. The week following the charity gala passed in a haze of conflicted emotions for Celeste. Despite the magical evening she had shared with Sebastian, the cruel whispers from society's elite had taken root in her heart like weeds in a garden. Every morning, she would wake hoping that the doubts would have faded with sleep. But they only seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Sebastian continued his daily visits to the bookstore, but Celeste found herself pulling back emotionally, building walls around her heart to protect herself from what felt like inevitable heartbreak. She had seen the way his world worked now, had witnessed firsthand the judgment and cruelty that awaited anyone who dared to cross social boundaries. The thought of subjecting Sebastian to constant scrutiny and gossip because of her humble background felt selfish and unfair. "You have been distant," Sebastian observed on Thursday afternoon, his gray eyes filled with concern. "Ever since the gala, you seem to be somewhere else entirely when we talk." Celeste busied herself with straightening books that were already perfectly organized, unable to meet his penetrating gaze. "I have just been thinking about things," she said vaguely. "What kind of things?" he pressed gently. Moving closer to the counter where she worked, the question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the unspoken fears and doubts that had been building in Celeste's heart. Why she wanted to tell him. About the whispers she had heard about his mother's cruel visit. About her growing certainty that their relationship was doomed to cause nothing but pain and scandal. But the words felt too heavy to speak aloud. About how different our lives are, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. About whether this is fair to either of us. Sebastian's face grew serious as he recognized the depth of her distress. He had noticed the change in her demeanor but had hoped it was temporary, that whatever was troubling her would pass with time and patience. "Celeste," he said firmly, reaching across the counter to take her hands. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his, and he saw the pain and uncertainty that she had been trying so hard to hide. "Nothing about our situation is unfair," he continued, his voice filled with conviction. "Love does not recognize social boundaries or bank account balances. What matters is how we feel about each other, not what other people think about those feelings." The difficult decision that evening, Celeste sat in her grandmother's kitchen, stirring her tea absently while wrestling with the most difficult decision of her young life. Rose watched her granddaughter with the patient wisdom of someone who had lived through enough, his heartbreak to recognize its symptoms. "You are thinking of ending things with Sebastian," Rose said quietly. Not bothering to phrase it as a question, Celeste nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I love him, grandmother. Love him more than I ever thought possible to love another person, but I am ruining his life." "How are you ruining his life?" Rose asked gently. "People talk about him now. They whisper about his poor judgment and question his choice to be with someone so far beneath his social status. What happens when those whispers reach his business associates and potential partners? What if my presence in his life damages his career or his reputation?" Rose reached across the small table and took her granddaughter's hands in her own weathered ones. "My dear child, a man who would allow others to dictate his choice of companion is not worthy of your love. And from what I have observed, Sebastian, Knight is very much worthy of it." "But what if I am being selfish?" Celeste asked through her tears. "What if I am holding him back from finding someone who could actually enhance his life instead of complicating it?" "Love is never selfish when it is real and true," Rose replied firmly. "And anyone who cannot see what a treasure you are does not deserve to be part of Sebastian's life anyway." Despite her grandmother's wise words, Celeste had made up her mind. The next morning, she would tell Sebastian that their relationship had to end. It would break her heart, but she convinced herself it was the right thing to do for both of them. The letter instead of waiting for Sebastian's usual afternoon visit. Celeste decided to write him a letter explaining her decision. She spent hours crafting the words, trying to express her love for him while making it clear that their relationship could not continue. The final version was stained with tears, but it conveyed everything she needed to say. "My dearest Sebastian," she began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone from the bookstore and from your life. Please do not think this decision comes from any lack of love on my part. Quite the opposite. I love you too much to allow my presence to continue damaging your reputation and complicating your future. You deserve someone who can stand beside you in your world without causing whispers and judgment. I will never forget the magical weeks we shared, or the way you made me feel like a princess from one of my beloved fairy tales. Please find happiness with someone worthy of the wonderful man you are." She sealed the letter and placed it on the counter where Sebastian would be sure to find it, then began packing her few personal belongings. Rose had a sister in a distant town who had offered Celeste a job at her small library. It would be a fresh start, away from the memories and the temptation to change her mind about leaving. The discovery Sebastian arrived at Pages and Dreams at his usual time to find the bookstore closed and darkened. A growing sense of panic filled his chest as he noticed the envelope with his name written in Celeste's careful script taped to the front door. His hands trembled as he tore it open and read her words, each sentence hitting him like a physical blow. By the time he finished reading, his vision was blurred with unshed tears, and his heart felt as though it had been torn from his chest. The woman he loved, the only woman he had ever truly loved, had disappeared from his life because she believed she was protecting him from scandal and gossip. James Mitchell, Sebastian's loyal assistant, found his employer sitting in his car. Outside the closed bookstore, an hour later, staring at the letter with an expression of devastating loss. "Sir," James said gently, sliding into the passenger seat. "I got your message. What can I do to help?" "She is gone," Sebastian said hoarsely, handing over the letter. "She thinks she is protecting me by removing herself from my life." James read the letter quickly, his own heart aching for his employer. In the years he had worked for Sebastian, he had never seen the man truly happy until Celeste had entered his life. The transformation had been remarkable. Sebastian had smiled more in the past month than in the previous year combined. "We will find her," James said firmly. "And when we do, you will convince her that she belongs with you." Sebastian looked up with the first spark of hope he had felt since discovering the letter. "You really think we can find her, Sir James?" said with a slight smile. "You are Sebastian Knight. When you set your mind to something, it happens. And this is more important than any business deal you have ever pursued." The search what followed were the most desperate and determined weeks of Sebastian's life. He hired private investigators, called in favors from business contacts, and personally visited every library and bookstore within a 500-mile radius. His mother, Margaret, tried repeatedly to convince him to give up the search and move on with his life, but Sebastian refused to listen to her objections. "This obsession with that girl is beneath you," Margaret said, during one particularly heated argument. "She has done you a favor by disappearing. You can find someone appropriate, someone who belongs in our world." "Celeste belongs in my world because I love her," Sebastian replied with steel in his voice. "And if you cannot accept that, then perhaps you are the one who does not belong in my life." The search led him through small towns and rural communities, each dead end adding to his desperation but never diminishing his determination. He learned that Rose had indeed had a sister named Dorothy who lived in the mountain town of Millfield. But when he arrived at her small library, he discovered that Celeste had left there as well, moving on to another location without leaving a forwarding address. After 6 weeks of fruitless searching, Sebastian made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He held a press conference, something he had never done for personal reasons, and publicly declared his love for Celeste Harper, standing before a room full of reporters and cameras. Sebastian spoke from his heart with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. "I am using this platform today to reach the woman I love, wherever she might be," he began, his voice strong despite the vulnerability of the moment. "Celeste Harper, if you are watching this, or if someone who knows you is watching, please hear what I am about to say." He paused, looking directly into the camera, as though he could see her face on the other side of the lens. "You believe that you are protecting me by staying away, but you are wrong. You are not damaging my reputation or complicating my life. You are my life. Nothing else matters without you. Not my business, not my social status, not the opinions of people who have never experienced real love." Sebastian's voice grew stronger as he continued, his public declaration becoming a battle cry for love over convention. "I do not care what anyone thinks about our different backgrounds. I do not care about whispers or gossip or social expectations. I care about the woman who showed me what it means to find joy in simple moments, who taught me that success means nothing without someone to share it with." The room was completely silent as Sebastian delivered his final words. "Celeste, please, come home to me. Let me prove to you that fairy tales can come true, that love really can conquer everything. I am not complete without you, and I will spend the rest of my life searching for you, if necessary. But please, please do not make me live without you any longer." The reunion 3 states away, in the small mountain town where Celeste had finally found refuge working at a local bookshop. She watched Sebastian's press conference on the tiny television in her rented room above the store. Tears streamed down her face as she heard him pour his heart out to the world, by declaring his love without shame or reservation. The elderly shop owner, Mrs. Patterson, knocked gently on her door as the broadcast ended. she said softly. That young man just told the entire world that he loves you. What are you going to do about it? Celeste looked at her new friend through tear-filled eyes. I am going home, she said simply. The journey back to Millbrook felt like the longest of her life, but also like the most important. With each mile that passed, Celeste felt her heart growing lighter, hope replacing the despair that had consumed her for months. Sebastian had proven that their love was stronger than social conventions, that he was willing to risk everything for her. She asked the taxi driver to take her directly to Pages and Dreams, knowing somehow that Sebastian would be there. Instinct proved correct through the bookstore windows. She could see him sitting at the small table where they had shared so many conversations, staring at an open book but clearly not reading. The brass bell above the door chimed softly as Celeste entered the bookstore that had been the birthplace of their love story. Sebastian looked up at the sound, and for a moment neither of them moved, drinking in the sight of each other. After so many weeks of separation, came back, Sebastian said finally, his voice rough with emotion. You asked me to, Celeste replied simply, tears already streaming down her cheeks. In 2 quick strides, Sebastian crossed the room and gathered her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let her go again. They stood there in the warm light of the bookstore, clinging to each other and crying tears of relief and overwhelming joy. I am so sorry, Celeste whispered against his chest. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just running away from my own fears. Never leave me again, Sebastian said fiercely, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. Promise me, no matter what anyone says or does, that you will never leave me again. Promise, she said through her tears. I love you, Sebastian. I love you more than my own life. And I love you, he replied, more than anything else in this world or any other. As they kissed in the golden light of the bookstore, surrounded by the books that had brought them together, Sebastian dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box that he had been carrying with him every day since she disappeared. Celeste Harper, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that fairy tales are real and that you are my happily ever after? Through her tears of joy, Celeste could only nod, overwhelmed by the perfect romance of the moment. Sebastian slipped the beautiful ring onto her finger, a classic solitaire that sparkled like captured starlight, and rose to kiss her again. The perfect ending. 1 year later, Sebastian and Celeste were married in a ceremony that perfectly reflected their unique love story. Instead of a grand cathedral or ballroom, they exchanged vows in the garden behind Pages and Dreams, surrounded by hundreds of books and fairy lights that turned the space into something magical. Rose walked Celeste down the aisle, her eyes bright with tears of joy as she watched her granddaughter marry the man who had proven that true love could indeed overcome any obstacle. Even Margaret Knight was present, having grudgingly admitted that her son's happiness was more important than social conventions. Celeste wore her grandmother's vintage lace wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Sebastian had picked himself that morning. Sebastian had never looked more handsome than he did waiting for her. At the altar they had created beneath an arch of climbing roses, their vows were simple but heartfelt, promising to love and cherish each other regardless of what the world might think. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by everyone who mattered to them, and the cheers that followed could be heard throughout the small town. As they danced their first dance, as husband and wife to music, provided by a simple quartet, Sebastian whispered in Celeste's ear, So, Mrs. Knight, how does it feel to be living in a fairy tale? Celeste smiled up at her husband, her heart so full of love that she thought it might burst with happiness. It feels like coming home, she whispered back. Like everything I went through was worth it because it led me to you. And as they continued to dance under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved and the books that had brought them together, both Sebastian and Celeste knew that they had found their happily ever after, not because it was easy, but because their love was strong, enough to overcome every challenge that had tried to keep them apart. The bookstore became their second home, a place where they would return throughout their long and happy marriage to remember where their love story began. And sometimes on quiet afternoons, they would sit together reading in the same chairs, where they had first discovered that fairy tales could come true, grateful every day that love had written their perfect ending.